week. So first of all, thank you to all of you who are here now, who completed that survey. And I'm sure a number of people will watch the replay who also submitted the survey. That was really helpful. It helped to give me a sense of what things are you're most interested in, and just helped to give me a good idea where to start and kind of what to start with. And so what I did was I went through all of those questions and tried to find ones that seemed to be kind of recurring theme type questions. And also I kind of prioritized on, there was a question for those of you who did the survey on kind of how urgent your situation is. So if you're currently looking for work, or you're expecting job offers soon, or you're just kind of curious. And I did try to kind of find questions for people who might be in a more urgent situation, but not exclusively. As you'll see, there's a few questions that are kind of the opposite of that. But I'll start with ones that were the most common ones, and kind of go from there. You should all be able to chat with me directly. And I understand that salary negotiation is a pretty sensitive topic. And so I'm trying to make it so that you can be here and be comfortable that you're not sort of, on a group chat and you don't know who's in there. And so if I've done this right, then I should be able to interact with each one of you individually on chat. You should be able to message me if you have any questions that come up, or if you have additional questions you'd like to cover. You should not be able to see other people that are in the meeting. And again, hopefully I have that right. If I don't, then let me know. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start with the questions that I have. It would be really great if anybody who's in here, if you could just ping me in chat, just so that I can see that you can interact with me. There we go. Got one. Thank you very much. Just got a test message. That's perfect. And I think we're good to go. So if you have questions, you can send them to me. And I can see there are some coming in now. So what I'm going to do is hit the 5 or 6 that I have kind of queued up. And then I'll go to chat and answer as many questions as I can. And hopefully this will be useful for you all. I'd love to know what you think. So with that, let me get started. And we'll start with just the first question that I have, which is, let's see if this works. Sorry. I'm a one-man show here, so here we go. Okay, so this is the most common question that came up that wasn't too surprising to me. And it's one that I have talked and written a lot about, and yet there are still a lot of people who haven't heard what I've had to say about this and haven't seen my videos on it or my course or anything like that. And so what I want to do is talk about what to say when they ask you for your salary expectations. So I used to phrase this question as what to say when they ask you for a current salary or salary expectations. I think that is still valid and useful, but most companies now are more reticent to ask for current salary because many states have outlawed it here in the US. And so I think that they have become less comfortable with it in a legal kind of perspective. And so they're just more inclined to avoid the current salary question. That's not to say that they won't ask you something that would make you think about what your salary is, or that might influence them when they're asking you this question. But for the most part, I think they avoid it. So the question is usually something like, hey, before we make you an offer, what are your expectations if you come to work for us? And so this is a tricky question to give a little bit of background on it. The reason it's tricky is it will often come up pretty early in the interview process. Sometimes it'll come up right before a job offer, but it's almost always seen by the candidate, by you, as a sort of a gateway question. Meaning that you have to kind of divulge this information in order to proceed in the negotiation or the interview process, or kind of wherever you are. And of course, that can be very uncomfortable, because if you're excited about this opportunity, or you've been interviewing for a while, maybe you've been out of work for a while and you're finally getting back into the workforce, and you can kind of see that light at the end of the tunnel, which is this job opportunity. But first you have to give them your salary expectations. Then that's a lot of pressure. And of course, I think that's one reason that recruiters like to ask this question. I think the main reason they'd like to ask it is that it makes their job easier. You take a guess as to what comp they can afford to pay you, and then they can use that guess to sort of triangulate what the right offer is, or possibly to sort of disqualify you altogether and just move on to a candidate who might be more amenable to that comp. So when they ask you for your salary expectations, my recommendation is to not give them a number, and instead to take the opportunity to sort of reiterate the value that you bring to the role that you're considering. And defer that first number to them. And so the kind of the shorthand way of saying this is, let them go first. I think it's important to do this for a couple of reasons, but I think the easiest way I can kind of describe how I think about this question is to reframe it. So they're saying to you, hey, you're interviewing for this role at our company. What are your salary expectations if you come work here? That seems pretty innocuous, but imagine that what they're really saying is something a little bit more nuanced, which is, hey, we have some number of roles open that looks sort of like this role that you've applied for, that we've reached out to you for on LinkedIn or however they got in touch with you. We're not going to tell you how many of those roles we're trying to fill. We're not going to tell you how long we've been trying to fill them. We're not going to tell you what we think the value of the role is to the company. We're not going to tell you what our budget is for your role or any of these roles. And given all that information that we're not giving you, why don't you just take a guess what it is that we are willing to pay you to do this job if you get hired, without having interviewed you most of the time? To me, that's a wild guess. You could be right. You could guess a good number that happens to be the sweet spot right at the top of their budget, which is where you want to be. But you're probably going to guess wrong. And by probably, I mean like 99% of the time, meaning one of two things will happen. You'll undershoot, which is, it will feel good, because if you undershoot and you get the job, then what I mean by undershoot is you've actually set a number that's below what their actual budget is. And in that case, what will usually happen if you get the job is they'll offer you more than you said you expected to make, which feels like a win. You feel like maybe you persuaded them or you caused them to offer you more than they were expecting to. But the reality is what happened is you set a number that was under the budget. And instead they came back with a number that's still at the bottom of their budget, but is higher than the one that you suggested. And so it feels like a win to you. But the bottom line is you probably cost yourself money, because if you had said nothing, they would have offered you something maybe not at the bottom of their budget, maybe at the middle of their budget, which could be substantially more. So that's one way that it can hurt. The other way that it hurts, sometimes even more, is that you take a wild guess and you guess way too high. And instead of saying, oh, let's reset that, which sometimes they will, they say, oh, goodness. And we thought that, you would say a much lower number. That's well outside of our budget. So it seems like this probably isn't a good fit. We'll call you if anything opens up. And so now you've totally lost out on the opportunity, which is unfortunate. So you don't want to lose out on opportunities like that. You also don't want to undershoot and cost yourself money. And so therefore, I think the best thing to do is not to give them a direct answer to this question. As I said before, emphasize the value that you think you bring to the role, and defer to them to make an offer if they're going to make an offer. And so that would sound something like, I don't have a number in mind right now. There's a lot that I'm still learning about this role, but I'm excited for the opportunity and for the team. I think I'll be a valuable asset on this team. And I'm looking forward to taking on more responsibility and making a big step forward in my compensation if and when we get to that stage. So you're kind of signaling a few things there. There's a little bit more nuance to that answer than it might seem. The first thing, though, is that you're refocusing the discussion on the value that you bring. So my entire negotiation strategy is value-based, meaning that you will rarely see an example of me suggesting that one of my clients or somebody who takes one of my courses or reads my book, you won't see me saying, hey, find really good market data and go push them to give you more money based on the market data, the comps that you can find. And the reason is that most of the time, especially in big tech, which is where I happen to work most of the time, but this is true kind of across industries now, they have a lot of market data too. And if you say, well, I have these 4 points that I got on levels, and I have this forum on Blind, and I talked to a guy who used to work there, and so my market data says that I should be around here, then their response can be, well, we have better data. We have more data. It's more current. We get a survey every quarter or every month. We know exactly what the market is paying people with your skill set and experience right now. And so we're pretty good with our offer. We're not going to change it because our market data is better than your market data. And that's sort of indisputable. There's not a whole lot that you can do to refute that, if that's what they say. And so because of that, I think it's better to not say numbers at all, to focus on the value that you bring and wait for them to make the first offer. The last thing I'll say on this is there's a lot of value in this strategy because I mentioned the word budget several times earlier. They may have begun with a certain budget and they may think they are locked into that budget. But the reality is that if you interview well and you do your job as the interviewing candidate, you can often change that budget. And that can look like either they decide to make an exception. There's at some companies, there's a literal exceptions process is what it's called, which is where they'll go get approvals for more funds for this particular role for an exceptional candidate. Or they might consider leveling you up, which is difficult, but not impossible. And if you really hit the ball out of the park in the interview process and impress them to the extent that they want to make you an offer, then they might consider making you an offer that was above the level that they initially suggested. And they might think, you know, you're actually more qualified. You've demonstrated more value than we expected in the interview process. Therefore, we're going to level you up. And they'll feel much less pressure to do that if you have given them a compensation expectation that aligns with the lower level. It's easier for them to say, well, we could have leveled you up, but we don't need to because the comp that you asked for is in line with the other level. So we'll just put you in the lower level and you can get yourself promoted over time. So that's why I don't think that when they ask you for salary expectations that you should share it. In chat right now, I'm going to share a link to an article that talks in great detail about this, more detail than I just did, believe it or not. And I'll also say that my program, Salary Negotiation Mastery, has quite a bit of material on this, and there's a full lesson on it that will, with scripts and things like that, that will walk you through it. So if you're in a situation where that would be useful to you now, then you can check out Salary Negotiation Mastery, which I linked to earlier in the chat to start the meeting. Okay. Next question. Okay. So how do you know if the offer that you've gotten from them is the best offer? I got so I'll be honest with you, this actually kind of surprised me a little bit. And I think the reason is, to me, it's really obvious how to do this, but I understand that I do this full time. And so there are a lot of people who are kind of wondering, like, how do you find out? So the answer to this is actually much shorter and much simpler. And that is, the way that you find out if they've made the best offer to you is to negotiate the offer that they made. And so there are lots of tactful ways that you can do that. But the idea is that they say a number, and the only real way to find out if that's the best number that they're going to offer you is to negotiate with them. And what I mean by that is if they say, here's a number, and you say, I don't really like that number, or I was hoping for something better. Can you do better? That's not really negotiating. I mean, it kind of is. It's very soft negotiation, but they're not really obligated or pressured in any way to respond to anything because you didn't give them a particular counteroffer. You didn't really give them a case. All you said was, I don't like that number. Can you give me a different number? And they can just say, no, we like that number. And so the only way that you can actually figure out if they've made the best offer to you would be to negotiate the offer. You want to do that tactfully, and you want to use a value-based case, like I mentioned in the last question. And so I think it's really important to focus on the value that you bring to the role, to negotiate with them, and to be an appropriate level of aggressive so that you know that they are in a position where they have to respond to a specific counteroffer and tell you if they agree with the counteroffer that you make. And that is how you find out if it's the best offer. So eventually you'll get to either they'll say yes to your counteroffer, which actually is, I call that a bad yes. I try to avoid it. And it actually doesn't give you confidence that you have the best version of the offer. It can be a little bit frustrating when you look back. But usually what will happen if you negotiate well and if you ask for enough, but not too much, is that you'll get sort of a partial yes. They'll move a little bit on this dimension, maybe total comp or base salary, or they'll change your bonus structure, or they'll give you a little bit more equity, and they'll kind of nudge things up to the point where you can say, yeah, I think I've made enough asks here, and I've gotten enough partial yeses that I can feel pretty good that I've maximized each component of this job offer. So now I know this is the best version of the offer. So the best way to figure out if they're making you the best offer initially is to negotiate that offer. You can also use market data and research, and you can look for things that will give you a kind of a directional idea of, this offer that I got for an L4 at this company for this much money. How does that compare to what I see on Levels or PayScale or Glassdoor? And you can compare them there, but that's only the first step. That only gives you a sense of sort of like how that offer stacks up against what the publicly available market data says. And like I said earlier, the data that we have access to is not super reliable. It's useful as a directional guide, but it's not really reliable. So once you have that information, the best way to figure out what is the best version of this offer is to negotiate it. Next question. How do I research my market value? So I kind of alluded to this before. What I'll do is I'll give you a very kind of quick overview of this market value process. I'll also say in salary negotiation mastery, I actually walk you through this with a worksheet and kind of take you through that process. And so if this is something that sounds interesting to you and that you want to know more about, salary negotiation mastery is a good place to go do that. Get the worksheet, actually walk through that lesson in that module and do this for yourself. But the high level overview is what I think of as sort of broadly concentric circles. And what I mean by that is you start really broad. So you're looking for, what does this job role pay in the geography that I'm interested in the industry that I'm interested in. So, I'm in North America in the US. Almost all of my clients are there. So that's just what I think about all the time. So most of my examples will tend to gravitate there. Occasionally I work with people in the EU. But the first thing I do is say, okay, well, look at the US market. And sometimes maybe even more specifically later, we'll talk about that. But you start with the US market for this particular role in this industry, whatever that industry is. Again, I work with tech mostly, but you could be looking at, the pharmaceutical industry or the construction industry or whatever industry that you're working in. And you say, what's the average kind of comp range for this role? So that's a good start. That's not getting you your market value, but what that gets you is a sort of a directional guide to what your market value might look like. What's the broad range of that value? And then you want to narrow it down by geography, like I mentioned earlier. So, if you're in the South or the Southwest or the West Coast or the Northeast or the Midwest, then those compensation levels, especially for on-site jobs, if you're not working remotely, if you're actually going into an office, then the geography can be pretty significant. Also, the geography of where the company itself is based right now, like where they're basing their compensation on, can be relevant to you. And so it's important to kind of narrow that general market research down for the industry and the role down to like the geography that you're going to be in. And then that will give you a tighter window. For example, if you're looking at the West Coast, if you're looking at Northern California, it's probably going to be higher than the averages that you found in the first step, where you're looking at broad kind of North America, US industry-wide numbers. On the other hand, if you're looking at something that's in the South or in the Midwest, it might be a little bit lower. And so you're kind of starting to narrow down that range and get something more specific. And then you can look at, the specific company that you're considering. If you have access to that data, again, that could be Levels or Glassdoor or Team Blind. It could also be in your network, depending on how far along you are in your career. There's a really good chance that people who either do currently work at that company or have worked at that company. You can get a sense of what they pay people relative to what industry averages look like. And so that will help you a lot in terms of narrowing it down. So now you've got the very broad industry-wide market value data in your large geographic region hemisphere, and then you narrow it down to the specific geographic region that you're looking at, if that's relevant to you, and you can kind of weight that depending on your situation, and then the specific company, if you can get data there. And then you should have a really good sense of what is my market value for my skill set and experience in these particular roles. And that will give you a good starting point. I should also say the reason I think the market value is most valuable, and you might be wondering this, is earlier I said, well, I don't really use market value to negotiate. I don't, but I do use it for figuring out, for example, what my minimum acceptable salary might be. So what's my walkaway number? If I go to this company and they make me an offer, what's the minimum that I need them to offer me to feel good about going to work there? Your market value estimate can really have a big influence there. It can influence some other things too, but that's a big place where I think it really helps. So start broad, your hemisphere, basically your large geographic region for your industry and your type of role, then narrow it down to the geographic region. And then if you can, narrow it down to the specific company, and you should have a pretty good sense of this particular opportunity that you're looking at, what the market value for your skill set and experience is for that company. And that will give you a good way to set a baseline for what to expect when they make you an offer. And also will give you a better sense of maybe how wide the window is that you're working in when you start to negotiate. Okay, next up. Okay, so this is, I mentioned earlier, I had some questions that I got from different people. So you can see the first set of questions came from people who are kind of in more urgent situations. They might be currently interviewing or negotiating, or they might be anticipating that. And this is kind of the opposite. So, how do I negotiate a bigger than normal merit increase? So, a lot of companies are either in merit increase period now, or they just went through it. And so I used to spend a lot of time thinking, okay, well, I'm going to do my review in January, and then I'll have my merit conversation probably sometime early March or so. And how do I get the most possible comp in that situation? So many of you may be listening and thinking, well, I already did go through that, or is it too late for me? And the answer is probably yes. It's very difficult within the normal merit increase cycle to get more money than was already budgeted for you. And the reason is that ball, the ball I'm talking about is the budgeting ball. That ball has been rolling for 6 months. Managers sit around in offices or virtual offices with spreadsheets, and those spreadsheets have budgets, and the budgets usually trickle down from like whatever the hiring budget is for, the organization that you're in or the business unit. And they kind of roll down to individual managers and teams. And so they say, well, here's our total bucket of money that we can budget according to our CFO for compensation increases in this merit increase cycle. And that might be nothing, or it might be something, or it might be a lot. And so then what they do is they essentially kind of fight it out over the spreadsheet. They say, well, this manager is going to get this much money. This manager is going to get this much money. Once they have their money, they have to allocate it to their employees. Typically, they'll do it according to basically what your performance review numbers were and maybe some other factors. But they say, well, this person is a really high performer, so they need a bigger than average raise. The average raise for our team is going to be whatever, 3%, 4%. Sometimes more, sometimes less. And so the average is 3 or 4%. This person is a super high performer, so I want to get them to 5.5 or 6%. This other person is underperforming, so we're going to probably bump them down to 1 or 2%. So all that budgeting has been happening for months. By the time that your manager actually sits down with you and says, here's your merit increase, you're going to get 3.5%. And maybe they talk through your performance review with you or something like that. So by the time you're having that conversation, it's very difficult to change that number in your favor because all of the budgeting has been done. And so if you think about everything I described that kind of rolls down from the CFO on down to your specific merit increase, in order for you to be given a different number, somebody else's number or many people's numbers have to change. So if they give you another 1%, that's going to cost everybody else on your team, 0.2%. If you have a 5-person team, or give or take on average. So I'm using very broad numbers, but the idea is that there's a lot of other budgeting that has to be kind of unwound and redone if they change your numbers. So because of that, most managers, most directors, most people that kind of roll up to the CFO are pretty reluctant to do that because it's just not fun. First of all, they spent months messing with this silly spreadsheet. Now they've given out merit increases and they don't want to go redo all that. Also, they've already had those conversations with the other people on your team. So they would have to go back to someone and literally take money from their pocket, or they would have to find some more budget and pull that in. It's just really hard. So instead, what they do is they give exceptional merit increases as off-cycle increases is what they call them. So typically the best time for this is like 6 months out. So now I'm finally going to answer the question. How do you negotiate a better than normal merit increase? Well, the answer is you probably don't. But the good news is that if you're looking at that right now, and this is merit increase time for you, probably around September, October, there's a really good chance that you could get a performance increase or another kind of merit increase, which would be an off-cycle merit increase. And so you start that process now by talking to your manager and saying, hey, I appreciate the 3.5% raise. That's nice, but it's not keeping up with inflation. I also think I'm really performing well. I've been doing very, very well in these areas. And so, I'd like to talk to you about a path to an off-cycle raise. And then your job is to make a case for them. And the case has 3 components. 2 of them are mandatory. 1 of them is optional. The first and most important component, which if you're listening closely, this will be different than what you would have expected for me to say, but you need to have a target salary in mind. So you need to specifically say what it is that you're going to ask for. And the reason is that this is different than a compensation, a new job offer negotiation. In particular, I mentioned earlier about salary expectations questions. That's a totally different scenario where you don't know any information. They don't know any information about you if you've held numbers back from them. And so everybody is sort of in a very wide range trying to figure out what the right number is to persuade you to join this company. In the merit increase case, you're already working for the company. They know what you're currently making. They know what their budget is. You probably know what the budget is at some level, not your team level, rolling up somewhere. You know how well the company is performing. So you have a lot of inside information. Also, your manager is a very busy person, and they're going to have to make an exception for you to get you more money. Also, you have a lot less leverage. You already work there. So your only real threat that you could make to them is to walk away. Whereas if you're new to the company, then you would have an opportunity to say, well, I'm going to go with another role at another company. And so I'm going to mute. Sorry about that. Throat's getting dry. Okay. So you need to do as much homework as possible for your manager so that they know exactly what they need to do, and you give them everything on a silver platter so they can go get more money approved for you if they would like to do that. And so the way you do that is you give them a very specific target salary. I'm at this much. I would like to be making this much money. Target salary, number 1. Number 2, a list of accomplishments. The more quantifiable these accomplishments, the better. And so what you're saying is I'm adding really when you're asking for a raise that's bigger than your merit increase, inflation increase, whatever you want to call it, then what you're saying is the work that I'm doing now is more valuable than the salary that we last negotiated. And so, in other words, you're doing more work, you're being more efficient, you're doing something that's more valuable than what was agreed on. Otherwise, it's hard to persuade somebody to pay you more money because you were hired or last negotiated your comp to be some number. You're doing the same work that you were doing at that time. And therefore, that number aligns well with the work as you negotiated it. And so what you have to do is make a case that you're actually more valuable. And so there are really three buckets these things can fall in. And I'm going to go really quickly through these. But when you're looking at the value that something, anything, an activity, a person, whatever, can add to an enterprise, a business, a firm, then there are really kind of three buckets that they'll fall in. The first one is increased revenue. You're bringing more money into the business. The second one is reduced costs. So you've done something that's more efficient and therefore costs the company less money to do things they were doing before or need to do. And the third one is reduced cycle time. And so that is, you get things done faster. You can ship software faster. You can test faster. You can get to market faster. You can turn out the marketing materials faster. You can do white papers faster. So your job with the accomplishments piece, the second mandatory piece behind target salary, your job with the accomplishments piece is to describe the things that you're doing that are more valuable than were anticipated last time your compensation was set. You want 3 or 4 bullet points and you want to say, I'm doing this thing and it's more valuable in this way with a number if possible. Sometimes it can only be a qualitative type thing. So I'm doing this thing that makes my manager's life easier. For example, I took some reporting off of my manager's plate and I took that responsibility over. That's valuable. My manager has more time to do managerial stuff and I'm doing the reporting stuff. I don't know if I can really quantify that, but I can say for sure my manager's life is better. They can be more productive as a manager because of it. So you want to include 3 or 4 bullet points there. And then the last thing that you want to talk about is accolades, this is the optional one. So if you do have some sort of evidence that you have been adding value, that your work has been recognized by other people, this really helps because a lot of times your manager just isn't tuned in. Kind of ironically, the better the employee you are, the less they're going to pay attention to you because they don't need to. They're out putting fires out somewhere else. They're working with people who need help, and they're not paying attention to you because you're a well-oiled machine. You're doing great work. They don't need to help you. And so you have to remind them. And sometimes the way that you can remind them is by telling them, here's something that somebody else said about my work. Here's something that a client said about my work. Here's an award that I got last year. Here's an email that you sent me. Here's an email that I got from the CEO last time I talked to him, whatever that is. And so those are the accolades. So the 3 components to a good raise request are a target salary, accomplishments, accolades. You say them to your manager verbally in that meeting. You're going to ask for meetings. Say, hey, I'd like to talk about a merit increase. I know we can't do it right now. Maybe we could do it later this year. You have this conversation and say, here's what I would like to get. Can you help me get there? Here are the reasons that I should get there. And that facilitates 2 things. One is that they can now go ask for a raise for you. You've given them a target number. You've given them accomplishments that have real value associated with them and maybe some accolades. So they can go circulate that internally to the finance team or to their boss or whoever else needs to approve these things. And they can make a pretty good case for you to get more money because you have done all the homework for them. And the second thing is that it kind of forces the conversation with them about whether or not this is something they can help you do. And so you'll get one of 3 answers: yes, no, or wait. Hopefully you get a yes. That's what you're hoping for. You might get a flat out no. What that tells you is that they disagree about the value that you're bringing, or they don't have any budget to spare. Either way, you're probably not going to get more comp there, which forces you to make a decision about whether you want to stick around for your current comp or you'd like to go find somewhere that you could be paid better. And then a wait or not yet is the third answer. That's the one where you want to work with your manager and say, okay, I understand we can't do this right now for budgeting reasons or calendar year or fiscal year reasons. What does the timeline look like and what do I need to accomplish to earn the raise that I've asked for? And so that will open up a very good conversation, hopefully, with your manager about what you need to do, how you can get there, and how you can accomplish that raise in the next 5 or 6 months, which will come really fast. So, okay, that's a really long answer to that question. I think I have one more prepared question here. And then I'll go to chat. So if you haven't messaged me your questions yet in chat, please send them over, and I will answer as many as I can. Okay. So I had a couple of different versions of this question where people were asking about sort of the current environment in tech, which is interesting. That's where I make my living. I work with software engineers and engineering managers going to big tech companies as their coach. And so I have noticed this. My business has definitely been impacted by just fewer people are changing jobs right now. And so, what changes would I make to my methodology and what would I not change? So first of all, if you're not kind of tuned into this, a lot of the US economy is doing really well. Unemployment is pretty low. People are changing jobs, even engineers. In big tech in particular, though, and it's rippling out through the rest of tech right now, there's either hiring freezes or layoffs going on. And that's for a lot of reasons that I won't get into. But the bottom line is that what that means is that people are just less frequently changing jobs. Either the jobs are not available for them to change through to, or they're nervous. They have a pretty good thing going and they're just going to stay put. They would rather just stay put and not change jobs, not take a risk going to somewhere where they might get laid off in 2 months when their current job feels pretty good. So they're just going to keep their head down, stay low, keep collecting paychecks, and kind of wait for the smoke to clear so they can figure out what to do next. And so what that means is that people are more nervous, they're a little bit more hesitant, and also there are fewer jobs out there being offered in tech in particular. And so how would that change my methodology? I think one thing that's really important is there's a thing that I use called the aggression factor, which I use for all of my clients. And it's basically a way for me to tease out what sort of situation this person is in, how badly the company wants to bring them on board, and therefore how aggressive they should be. This is probably going to affect the aggression factor for most people because companies are hiring less. It could affect the aggression factor in kind of two ways. One is it might reduce the aggression factor. If you're going to a company that's really budget constrained, that's laying off people right now, but they happen to have a few recs open because they're desperate, you can push, but you may not be able to push too hard because you might run into just sort of a brick wall of budget where, they had to make an exception to get this rec opened. It's very important, but they're not going to be able to get more money and there's not much you can do. That does not mean that you should not negotiate, but it means you might be a little bit less aggressive, that you might be in a more favorable negotiating situation. So I might reduce the aggression factor. The general range that I'll counter people is somewhere between 10 and 20% of whatever you're negotiating, usually total comp or base salary. I almost never go below 10%. And we'll sometimes go above 20% for the right candidate, but that's a really high aggression factor candidate. So I would say it's less likely to go above 20% right now. And you might want to be more conservative, closer to that 10% counter offer. And so that's the one change that I can think of in my methodology. Everything else I would do the same. But I am kind of pulling back on the reins a little bit for aggression factors. And that's just because it seems like the signals that we're getting from recruiters and from people who are hiring are that they are very budget constrained. Things are tough right now for them as companies are kind of holding back budgets. And so until that tide turns, the aggression factor is kind of the one adjustment that I'm making. The strategy that I'm using, the way I communicate counteroffers and all those things, the same. But the aggression factor is a little bit lower, not a lot, but a little bit. So if I had a candidate who I thought was really good, an aggression factor of like an 8 would put them in an 18% counter. I might see other things that cause me to pull that aggression factor back to like a 5 and I counter at 15% or something like that. So it's a small change, but it's meaningful. I think it's important to know, that you're countering a strong counter, but that you're not kind of overshooting by too much where you could sour that relationship. Of course, that's not something I can teach very well, but I do try to guide my clients into the right direction. It's going to be to their benefit. What would I not change? Pretty much everything else. You should definitely still be negotiating. For the reasons that I mentioned before, if you do get a job offer in this environment and you're in tech, then that means that somebody fought really hard to get that job offer out there to you, that they're very motivated to hire someone. And so you can't discount that completely. It's important to know that they are still hiring in this environment, and therefore you must be a special candidate for them to hire. So you should negotiate. And the question is how hard you should negotiate. That's where the aggression factor question comes in. But otherwise, I'm not changing anything. Everything that I'm doing is the same as it was before. I'm not seeing any adverse effects from that. I'm not really seeing much difference in the actual negotiations. I'm just noticing a lower volume of negotiations across the board, lower volume of job offers in tech. And I think there is some reason to be slightly less aggressive than I normally would be. But in general, I tend to err on the side of aggression. So that's me backing out to sort of a moderate level of aggression from kind of a high level of aggression. Okay. So I'm going to go to open Q&A here. Let's see. So I've got some questions in chat. I'm just going to go back through first come, first served. Okay, so the first question is, when you're interviewing for roles, is it appropriate to say that you're interviewing for other roles that have pay between X and Y, that has a pay range? So let me see if I can reframe this. So if you're interviewing and they're asking about comp, is it appropriate for you to say, I'm also interviewing for other roles in a range, this range budget? I would say that I would not suggest doing that. And the reason is that any number that you give could be a tip off to them that makes it too easy to give you a low number. And so one of the main reasons actually that I don't share salary expectations, or suggest my clients don't, is that occasionally there will be a company that is really excited to hire you and will make you an outlier offer. So if you're in a situation where you're asking me, is it appropriate to say that I'm interviewing for other roles that pay between these ranges, then you're interviewing for multiple companies. And when you get to a certain number of companies, there's a better chance than not that some company will have a really high value on the skill set and experience that you bring, and they might make you an outlier offer. If you're telling them all the same range of numbers, then they are not as incentivized to give you that outlier offer. And so this, again, this is rare, but I was working with a client 3 or 4 years ago. He was in fintech, and he had a number of offers in like the 250,000 total comp range. And he was asking a very similar question to this, what should I tell them? Can I give them other numbers? And I told him, no, let's let them make offers and see what they offer, because you never know. And sure enough, he got an offer for literally double that. So like very close to 500,000 total comp, same skill set, same experience, same resume, same interview process. But he went and found a company where his specific skill set and experience was really valuable to them. And if he had suggested to them 250, even said, well, I'm going to go crazy, I'll go 300,000 total comp, he would have been under by 200K. That's not to say he would have lost out on 200K. They might have still made him a competitive offer. Maybe they compromise at 400K. They were willing to pay 500. He said 300, they go 400 to convince him to join. But the point is that anytime you say a number, you're reducing the chances that you'll get a surprising number back from somebody who makes you an offer. I'll also say, this just occurred to me, if you do get that outlier number, you should still negotiate it. In the case that I mentioned before, I was able to negotiate a pretty good deal for that client, even though we had already gotten a kind of an outstanding outlier offer. Hopefully you saw, I just took on the open Q&A thing. I don't think you need a full screen of that. So you're going to get me on camera for a little bit. Let's see. Okay. So I'm looking, give me a second here. Kind of a long question. I'm just going to read it real quick. Okay. So, 3 questions here. So the first one, how do you actually phrase your counteroffer? So the answer to that is that basically what you do is you're going to counteroffer in an email. The actual counteroffer should sound something like this in the email. It's near the bottom of the email in the template that I use. But it is, you offered $100,000 total compensation. I'd be more comfortable with $115,000 total compensation. I think that amount aligns well with the value that I bring to the team, and I look forward to hearing what you think. So you say you offered X. It's important to say the you offered X part. You want to remind them of what the offer is to make sure that you're actually negotiating the same thing. Sometimes what you'll find is that you have misheard their offer, or you're doing different math than they're doing. Recruiters can be very creative with the math that they do. And so you want to make sure that when you're describing the offer that you got, that you're clear about the things that are valuable to you and how you interpret the offer, to make sure that they're not including things in the offer that you're not necessarily including. Like, if you work at a big tech company and they have a chef in the cafeteria and you get free lunch every day, sometimes they'll roll that into total comp. And that isn't really something you can negotiate, or might not even care about if you're working remotely. And so you want to make sure that you have restated the offer itself. You have offered X, and I would be more comfortable if we could do Y. So that more comfortable phrasing is something I call it using positive language, but it's a way of positively saying in a positive way, I would be more comfortable, as opposed to that makes me sad, or that's not a good number, or this is a terrible offer. You want to say you offered X, I'd be more comfortable if we could do Y. So that's the best way to phrase that. Again, I know I'm kind of a broken record here. This is something I cover in depth in Salary Negotiation Mastery. I'm going to put the URL in the chat, and also with my coaching clients. The difference between Salary Negotiation Mastery and coaching, by the way, is coaching is basically for people who are software engineers or engineering managers that are in big tech, making $200,000 or more total comp. Those are the folks that I tend to work with most coaching, not exclusively, but mostly. Salary Negotiation Mastery is for anybody who is in tech, preferably, not necessarily exclusively, but mostly people in tech who are, computer science, engineering, data analysis, anything kind of in tech, where you're negotiating, but you're not yet at that $200,000 total comp level. Salary Negotiation Mastery is a program that I made so that you can use my methodology on your own to get the best result possible when you negotiate your job offer without working with me one-on-one, which is a little bit more expensive. Quickly, there were a couple more parts of that question. When should you counteroffer? Yes. So the person who asked this question suggested like a day or two after. Yeah, that's about right. So typically when you get an offer, the first thing you're going to do is ask for some time to think about it. That's for two reasons. One is to give you some time to think about it, which is pretty obvious. The second reason is that you want to move the conversation. If it's on the phone, you want to move it back to email. And that's a way to get off the phone and then reset and go back to email, because it's much better if you counteroffer over email, negotiate over email as long as you can. The reason for that is that most of these recruiters are professional negotiators. It's what they do every day. And there's a good chance that in 1 or 2 days, a recruiter will negotiate as many job offers as you're going to negotiate in your career. So they're probably just going to be more comfortable in that environment than you, and they might outflank you and sort of get you a worse result than if you had taken your time and kind of built a good case. Also, there's a lot of value in a written counteroffer because you can actually build your case into it. And you can actually describe not only what you want, which is the thing that I said earlier, but why you want it and why you're more valuable, which is similar to the accomplishments thing that I mentioned for asking for a raise. It's not the same, but it's very similar. So yeah, so you will have asked for time, you'll take time, you'll write your counteroffer, and you'll send that counteroffer usually like the next day. I'm not a big fan of delaying just to delay, just wasting time, just to kind of, I don't know, flex or show like a power position. I think it is better to show the recruiter that you're not messing around, that you want to close this deal. They want to close this deal. Let's get this done. I thought about it overnight. Here's my counteroffer. So I think that's the best way to do it. And then what percentages are reasonable to ask? 10 to 20% is the range. I think I mentioned that earlier. So that's where I would start, is 10 to 20%. Reading the next question here. Just bear with me for a second. Okay. So this is someone who said that they were recently laid off and they're searching for the first time in quite a while. So they don't currently have a job. And should they ask for more than they're previously making? So first of all, let me say, I'm sorry that you were laid off. I have been laid off before, and I know how stressful it can be. That's very frustrating, and I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. I hope that you have some good prospects in the pipeline and that you can find a good opportunity soon and alleviate some of that stress. But I'm sorry that you're going through that. Yeah. So first of all, hopefully earlier I was talking about not sharing numbers. So they might know that you're not currently working, but they don't know necessarily what you were making previously, and that's good for you. And so I think, you also mentioned in your question that you don't have any leverage. You do have leverage. If you get a job offer, you've got leverage because you're the person that they want to fill the role that you're applying to or that you're negotiating for. And so that's the leverage, and it's real leverage. As an aside, if you think about the interview process that you would experience most of the time. So again, I work mostly with big tech folks, but there's at least 1 or 2 screening calls with a recruiter or multiple recruiters. You'll talk to the hiring manager sometimes before you formally start the interview process. You'll talk to 3 or 4 people on the team. You'll talk to your manager that's going to be on the team. You might talk to their manager or maybe a couple levels up. You might go through a panel or a loop interview where there's 5 or 6 people spending half an hour to an hour with you consecutively. And there's just a lot of time and money being spent on finding the right candidate for this role. And then they get to the point where they make you an offer. They've probably spent thousands or tens of thousands of dollars conservatively, maybe a lot more if they've flown you out for on-the-site interviews. They spend a lot of money. And that demonstrates how valuable it is for them to actually fill this role and to get the right person into it. So you do have leverage. It's just not the kind of leverage that we usually think about, which is, competing job offers or, an alternative where you can just stay put at your current job, but you do have leverage. So don't tell them what your previous salary was if you've been let go. Don't talk a lot about how you're not at work right now. It's okay for them to know that. I don't think that you should conceal it, but I wouldn't dwell on it. And something else that you didn't ask about, but that I'll say is I also am not a big fan of whatever happened at your previous opportunity. You were laid off. I think it's fine to say, yeah, there was a reduction in force. I got let go. I wouldn't talk about it beyond that. Don't badmouth the old company. Don't say how frustrating it was to work there. Don't say how the writing was on the wall or anything like that. Just mention as a matter of fact, yep, they had a reduction in force. I got let go. looking for my next opportunity. I'm excited about this one, and then move on. And so in that sense, I think you do have leverage. Don't worry about negotiating for more than your previous salary. I say go for it. See what they offer you. Hopefully you don't share your salary expectations or your old salary with them. That means they have to make an offer based on the value that you bring, and then negotiate with, in your mind, the leverage being that they have gotten to the stage in the process where they're making you a job offer, which is pretty powerful. And so take that offer, negotiate it, see what the best version of it is. And don't necessarily cut yourself off from more compensation just because you're out of work right now. I know it can be very stressful. I have experienced that before. It's not fun. But I encourage you to kind of overcome that fear of losing the opportunity, or just, the kind of incentive that you have to get back to where you're getting a paycheck again. Lean into that, and negotiate and show them what the value is that you bring. Do I have any tips for negotiating salary when being offered your first big job as a developer? Okay, so there's a couple of things here that are interesting. First, big job as a developer. So I assume that you're an experienced developer of some sort. You've got at least a few years. Maybe now you're moving up to a larger tech company or just a bigger opportunity. Maybe it's a senior type role. My biggest tip for negotiating that salary is don't sell yourself short. It can be very tempting to just kind of see the opportunity itself as the value that you get in the negotiation. Don't do that. If you're leveling up, it's because you've leveled up your skills, you have experience that's valuable, and that it's going to be harder to find than when you were, for example, an entry-level developer. And so, if you're coming right out of undergrad and you're going in to work as an entry-level developer, there are thousands or tens of thousands of those people that are available at any given time for a job. That's not to say that it's not a valuable job, but there are a lot of people who can do it. The more senior you get, the fewer people are who can do that job. There are just fewer people who are experienced because people retire, and over time people move into other industries or whatever. And so the fact that you're moving up means you're moving into a space where there are fewer engineers who can do what you can do. There are fewer developers who can do what you can do. And so you should negotiate. And don't just accept the fact that you're moving up to a more senior role as a reason to not negotiate and kind of rest on your laurels there. So I think my number one tip is you have to be diligent and go ahead and negotiate. This is maybe your first opportunity to really negotiate. I'm thinking back to one of the favorite pieces of advice that I ever got in my career was very early. I was leaving my first full-time job as an engineer. And I had a boss who I only had for maybe 6 weeks. And he said, Josh, your first 3 jobs are super important, but all for different reasons. Your first job out of undergrad is just an opportunity to have a job, to know how to show up for work every day, how to show up to meetings on time, how to be responsible for the things that you're responsible for and do good work. Your second job is where you get experience. It's where you start to get things that you can put on your resume that are valuable. You're starting to get those reps. You're starting to get things that are giving to you because you're a more experienced person, a more experienced engineer, and you can do better work. And so you can start kind of padding your resume. And the third job is where you get paid. You're probably in that third job category or thereabouts if you're saying this is my first big job as a developer. So don't take your foot off the gas. Don't experience imposter syndrome. Push the imposter syndrome away. Negotiate your job offer and see how good this jump can be for you, because you're finally in an opportunity where you can actually get paid for all the work that you've done so far to get to where you're getting your first big developer job. Okay, super long one here. So give me 10 seconds just to skim this. Okay. Okay, so the question is really, it's really about, gosh, how do I paraphrase this? Okay, so there's internal recruiters. You go to a company and there's an internal recruiter. It's somebody who's in-house. So if you go work at Google, you're almost certainly working with internal recruiters. If you go to Amazon, they have internal recruiters. You'll work with 3 different recruiters through the process. Sorry, I'm talking so fast. I'll slow down. A lot of times though, like medium-sized and smaller companies will outsource recruiting because it's a very expensive function. And so they work with third-party recruiters or headhunters or whatever you want to call them. Executive search at the higher levels. And so you have these kind of external recruiters their job is to find candidates to fill roles at other companies that they don't work for, but they work with. So the company is the client of this external recruiter. And so the question is what to do when these external recruiters, these third-party recruiters, continue to press on salary. What do you do? And I would say this, first of all, this is a great question. So thanks for asking. So back to what I said earlier, what if you say, I want this, I think I add a lot of value to this role and I don't really have a number in mind. And I want this move to be a big step forward for me in terms of compensation and responsibility and all that good stuff. And they say, nope, we have to have a number. And you say, well, I don't really have a number in mind. I'm not really comfortable with that. I haven't thought about it very much. I look forward to hearing what you think when we get to that stage. And they say, nope. So this person is saying, what can you say? And suggested, what's your client's budget, which is, I think, a good thing to do. So if they keep pressing you, you can say, it sounds like you're trying to qualify me for a pay range. If you want to tell me what that pay range is, I'll tell you if we're in the ballpark. And so I like this. I don't like to use it because it means they keep pressing you, but I like it as a response because it's almost a checkmate, which is like, because by now they would have said, oh, well, we don't want to waste everyone's time and we're trying to move quickly and efficiently. We want to make sure that we make something that sounds good to you. And you're saying, oh, great. Well, here's an opportunity for you to do all those things. Tell me the range for the role that you're considering, and I will tell you if we're in the ballpark. And so you kind of flip it on them and say, this sounds really important to you. It sounds like you really want to make sure that I'm okay with this range. So why don't you tell me the range and I'll tell you if it's in the ballpark. The nice thing is that the in the ballpark phraseology is very vague. And so that doesn't mean that you can't negotiate. It doesn't mean that if they say the range is 100 to 145K, it doesn't mean that you're locked into that range. It just means that you think it's in the ballpark. Maybe for you, ballpark extends up to 175. Who knows? So at least you can tell them. And there is value there in that if they said it's the range is 140 to 140 or 100 to 145K, and you're thinking I'm hoping for 300K. Okay, well, maybe it's time to reset the conversation. You could ask them then, okay, wow, that's a lot lower than I was expecting. Can we reevaluate the level for this job that we're looking at? Is there something more senior? You can move that conversation if you need to, but at least you'll then still not have set a number. They'll say a range and you can say the range is in the ballpark. And then you can continue with the interview process, which again is valuable because throughout the interview process, you have an opportunity to actually change their budget. I mentioned getting leveled up earlier if you do really well, but there's also a potential for you as you defer that salary question to continue to reiterate to them how important you are and how valuable you are and how unique you are for this role, to the point where they change from, what's the smallest number we can say that this person will say yes to how much money do we need to offer this person for them to come do this job for us? Because we've interviewed them. They're a superstar. We've got to have them on our team. How do we do it? What's it going to cost? And you still haven't given them a baseline. So they're thinking, well, what's a big number for us? How much can we stretch our budget? What can we do? And so again, I think it's important that you give them an opportunity to think about what the big numbers are that they're comfortable with and see where it goes. Okay. So I think I've answered all the questions that were in chat. I've answered all the questions that I had prepared. I'll give you maybe 30 more seconds. If there's anybody who still has questions that I haven't gotten to, feel free to put them in chat. In the meantime, I'll say this has been a lot of fun for me. If you're here, it's because you're on my newsletter email list. Would be great to hear from you and hear what you thought. I mentioned a couple of things, which I'll put in chat again now. But salary negotiation mastery, pretty much everything that I've said, except for salary negotiation mastery does not talk about internal raises and merit increases. I'm focused exclusively on job offer negotiation with salary negotiation mastery. But a lot of what you heard today is basically me trying to summarize salary negotiation mastery without the kind of formal structure that I put into that program to help you to actually learn it and use it in real time. So I encourage you to check that out. I'm going to put the link in chat right now. And I'll also say, if you are changing jobs soon, I got a number of survey responses last week when I announced office hours, saying, yeah, I'm currently negotiating or going to negotiate soon. If that's you, and you're negotiating something that looks like $200,000 or more total comp, then look at my coaching offering and see if that resonates with you. I work with people one-on-one. That's what I do full time. And I would love to chat. There's a short application on that page that I just shared that will give me more information about your situation so I can see if you're a good fit for my offering. But I'd love to talk about working together to negotiate if you have a job offer that you're going to negotiate soon. So I think with that, I'm going to wrap up this salary negotiation office hours. The first one, thanks to everybody for who came out. I'm pleasantly surprised at how many people came in. Thank you for your awesome questions. I'm going to do this regularly. I think this was a lot of fun for me, to be honest with you. It's nice to connect with y'all. And also just, I'm really happy with the quality of questions that I got, and I have a lot more still from the survey that I sent out last week. So I hope to see you again soon in a future salary negotiation office hours. If you enjoyed this, let me know. If you didn't enjoy it, let me know. Shoot me an email. Would just love to hear what you thought, what I could do differently in the future. I'm going to continue to iterate on this and evolve. So thank you for coming out. Like I said, check out my coaching offering if you are going to be negotiating anytime soon. Check out Salary Negotiation Mastery if you want to dive deeper and see a more formal, structured program version of what I was talking about today, plus, templates for counter offers and templates for how to respond when you get a job offer and how to figure out your aggression factor and all that good stuff is in there. So thanks for coming out. It was great seeing everybody. Hopefully we'll see you again in a future salary negotiation office hours.